Some insults don't land like a slap. They arrive as a suggestion with soft edges. A sentence that pretends to be a kindness and still manages to wipe your name off its feet at the door. If you've ever worked through a January on Lake of the Woods, you know that what keeps a place standing isn't drama, it's the practiced, boring faith of people who sweep before they open, who check the pump gauges before the first truck noses up to the island, who record cooler temperatures because milk and honesty both sour if you don't respect them. I used to think old age would declare itself with aches that made me gentler. What I know now is this: the older I get, the more I trust the little work that holds. Paper before voice, locks that latch, a ledger with columns that don't flatter or lie. That's not weakness. That is the strength you learn after outliving someone you love and running what they left you through winters that don't ask permission to be hard. My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 62, a widow, and I run Ellison's General Store and Cabins on a bend of highway outside Kenora. We sit where the pines keep their own counsel and boats hum like contented wasps when the wind is right, 2 pumps under a tin canopy. A store that smells like coffee and bait. And 4 cedar cabins looking at the lake like men who remember to take off their hats in church. The building out back that holds my life is not pretty, a cinderblock room with a steel door, cheap shelving, and the old safe Bill bought used in 1991 because it weighed more than our marriage at the time and he found that funny. In that room I keep a binder where every month gets a tab and every tab has the same headings: HST filing, fuel delivery slips, payroll, supplier invoices, service tickets, cooler logs, insurance renewals. The binder never asks me if I'm tired. It accepts the day as proof. I wake at 4:45. Even in summer I move like a winter person, socks first. Kettle on, radio low. I unlock the forecourt and listen for the metallic yawn the canopy gives when the air warms from night to morning. I check the sump alarms and the interstitial monitor on the double-wall tanks because damage doesn't always announce itself with a leak. Sometimes it starts as a number that detours. I walk the island with a rag and wipe away yesterday. And when the first pickup pulls in, I'm ready to lean on the counter and count change like we're practicing something together. In July, the cabins fill with families and fishermen and people who needed to talk themselves into joy. In February we sell propane and coffee and the kind of small talk that keeps a town from freezing up. I live in the little rectangle behind the store where the linoleum is clean and the table is scarred and the chair remembers how I sit. My son, Landon, came home last fall with a big city confidence that made the door frame seem a size too small. He is 35, handsome in a way that can be a man's enemy when he forgets to sweeten it with humility. He left for Toronto at 19 to be a designer of things that live on screens. When the tech firm folded this spring, he called to say he wanted to help me modernize. The sentence landed like relief. I was tired of fighting the debit machine and the new tax portal alone. He brought with him a woman he introduced as his partner in work and life, Bryn. 32. A real estate agent who specializes in lake properties. She knows what filters do to sunset and how to sell a shoreline without mentioning the blackflies. The first weeks went well enough. Landon swapped the old POS for a cloud-based system that doesn't make the day's end feel like math punishment. He set up an Instagram and posted a picture of the coffee machine at dawn that made strangers message me to say my life was a mood. Bryn suggested we standardize the cabin linens and offered to stage 1 to show the experience. I let her because I know the difference between making a bed and making a point. And sometimes letting someone make a point saves an argument elsewhere. Spring thaw brought hope and a leak under pump 2 that wasn't a leak at all. Just frost heave making itself known. But it got me out of bed at 2 a.m. anyway. I stood in the forecourt in my parka and watched the moon do its one useful trick, proving light is cheap when you don't have to pay for it. I tightened a coupling with Bill's old wrench, wrote a note for the service tech, and went back to bed with the kind of relief a body earns by choosing work over panic. The insult snuck in with the geese. It was the last weekend of May. The one I mark with a barbecue to say thank you to the regulars who keep us alive in months when tourists think the highway closes. I bought too many buns and got the grill going in the gravel patch by the propane cage. The air smelled like meat and lake, which is as close as a general store gets to a hymn. Neighbors came and leaned on the truck beds the way men do when they mean to say something important but start with weather first. Kids ran in and out for popsicles. A woman from Winnipeg who has been renting Cabin 3 since the year her father died brought me rhubarb cake and an apology for not frosting it. We laughed like old friends. Because we are. Bryn had made a slideshow on a tripod she set up under the awning. The first slides were harmless. Old photos of Bill and me building the first deck. Summer shots of dusk when the loons boss the soundscape. We're honoring the past, she said. Just wait for the new. People cheered politely. Landon stood jeans clean with a microphone on a stand because apparently we own a microphone now. He tapped it and read the room the way he reads a phone, expecting compliance because the screen always obliges. Thanks for coming, he said. It's time. Time to move Ellison's into a new era. Mum's done a great job for years. But she's old and she shouldn't have to carry this. Bryn and I are going to take the wheel. I could feel the words work on the crowd like a breeze that finds the tender leaves first. Some faces tried to pretend they hadn't heard. Some faces turned toward me with a concern that only made the sentence feel truer than I wanted it to be. Old. Weak. He didn't say weak. Not out loud. He said it with the rest of the sentence. The way you might tell someone they've earned a rest while you take their keys. He clicked the next slide. Ellison Shores, New Era by Landon and Bryn, in a font that looked like it was embarrassed to be from the north. Photos of cabins I recognized dressed like something they aren't. We're in talks, he said. Developers. An investment to elevate the shoreline. A family-friendly resort with a branded general store experience. Mum will have a beautiful condo in town. She can just enjoy life. He smiled at me like he'd brought me flowers. He had brought me a shovel and a place to dig. There are times when the body teaches a woman to save herself by being useful. I refilled the ketchup. I put fresh napkins where hands could find them. I checked the garbage and tied it off even though it was half full because I needed to practice finishing something. I stood next to the grill and flipped the last 4 burgers and said to a teenager I like, "Take these in, honey, and put them under the warmer." The teenager looked at me the way teenagers look at a woman who has refused to be replaced by the version of her a sloppier story wanted. He took the tray and did as he was told. People came up after and pressed my hand and said, "Mara, if you need anything," which is a kindness that can feel like a preface to condolence. Bryn hugged me and smelled like hairspray and hunger. Landon leaned down to kiss my cheek and whispered, "Trust me." I nodded because I needed to leave him with a sentence to replay that didn't sound like failure. When the last plate was thrown away and the cool came back, I locked the store and walked out to the dock. It's the place I go when sentences won't behave. The lake was flattening. That particular evening tiredness that makes the world honest. I sat on the edge and let my feet graze the air over the water and said my husband's name out loud once. Bill. It's not prayer. It's inventory. Then I went into the office. I keep the important papers in the bottom drawer of the cabinet under a file labeled legal that no one would waste a thief's time on if they ever broke into a place in the middle of nowhere to steal pens. I pulled the folder. Title in my name for lot and buildings. Land survey from when we replaced the septic. Environmental compliance report from when we installed the new double-wall tanks. Insurance policy declarations with my name as named insured. HST number printed bold in a kind font. Payroll records for the kids who have grown up and brought their babies back for gas. Cabin rental agreements. A copy of Bill's will. The ink faded but the lines sharp. I laid them out on the desk like a story I could still write. Then I opened my email because sometimes, against my better judgment, I look into the pit where truth hides. I found a note from an address I didn't recognize, an assistant at a development company in Winnipeg. Attached, a letter of intent. Addressed to Ellison Shores. Which is not a legal name. Signed by Managing Owner Landon Ellison. Deposit terms listed. A proposed closing date. My small name nowhere. I went very still. When I am angry, I do not fling. I sort. I clicked to the bank email. There it was. An e-transfer deposit that had come into a new sub-account Landon set up last week when he told me he was moving, operating efficiencies. I clicked through to insurance. A note from Bryn to our broker. Asking to update primary contact to Bryn, and add event coverage capacity in Q3 for branded launch. I clicked to the town portal. I found an application for a minor variance on a parcel number I know like a face, submitted by a representative on our behalf. The words, recreational rezoning process to follow, made my teeth hurt. None of these were by accident. None of them were legal. All of them were designed to look like progress until someone bothered to ask whether the paper matched the world. I turned off the monitor and looked at the desk very carefully so I would not mistake a surface for a plan. Then I took a folder from the shelf and labeled it with my cheap label maker because that act steadies me. Facts, not feelings. Into it I slid the title. The survey. The insurance declarations. The HST number. The payroll. The rental agreements. The environmental report. And printed copies of the LOI. The bank deposit. The insurance email. The variance application screenshot. I printed one more thing. The page from the Ontario website about powers of attorney because Landon had asked me last week to sign a temporary one, so he could push paperwork faster. My stomach had said no and my hand had complied. My stomach was vindicated. I slept badly. Dreams of water going where it shouldn't, the fear most people call by other names, kept knocking on the door of my patience. At 4 I gave up. Boiled water. And sat at the small table to make 2 lists in my blunt pencil. One was called what I paid for. The other was called what he forgot. Under the first I wrote the winter I sold Bill's truck to cover wages and taxes when the road shut down and we were open mostly for men who needed to tell themselves the world still had places like this. I wrote the double-wall tanks and the spill kit and the inspection that said, good, in a way that made me cry. I wrote the new cooler after the old one coughed its last. I wrote Landon's tuition for his second year when he was ashamed to ask. Under the second I wrote, HST remitted on time for 22 years. Fuel slips that add up. Payroll paid even when weekends were cruel. Receipts for bread and beer. The time we opened on Christmas morning because a neighbor's generator had empty tanks and his father's oxygen concentrated only when the power stayed. These aren't debts anyone is legally required to repay. They are the quiet arithmetic a mother does to keep herself from confusing love and harm. I went out and opened the store. Work does what it does best, it insisted on being done. I ran the morning journal. Compared it to last night's Z report. Adjusted for the cash deposit I could hold in my head the way some people hold a tune. At 7, a line of trucks formed. And we fed them. I poured coffee for a man who drives plow in winter and teaches his grandson names in summer. He said, "Heard there was a speech." I said, "There was." He said nothing else, which is how some men sing. Around 10, Landon came in with a smile that sold more than one person the lie that charm is competence. "We crushed it," he said. "Lots of interest. We can get Mum set up so she can relax. Condo by the mill. All new appliances. No more plunging toilets." He laughed at that like I hadn't been doing the very thing that kept his prospects possible. I handed him a box of oil filters and asked him to stock the shelf. He did it in that careless way of a man fitting a job to his mood. I moved behind him and turned all the labels to the front because labels should face the world, not sulk against the wall. After lunch I called my neighbor Nora to watch the till for half an hour and went to the bank. Kenora banks better than people think. Money here is dull and honest. Which is how I like my company. I sat with the manager, a woman with straight hair and straight ethics, and explained that there had been a deposit into a sub-account I had not authorized. She pulled up the profile, frowned, and said, "We'll need to adjust permissions. You'll need to lock them." I said, "Dual signatures for any transfer above 500. Remove Landon as an online user. Send me paper confirmation. And let me move that deposit into an escrow pending legal review." She nodded like a woman who respects a sentence built on a backbone. We did the forms. I signed where the lines asked me to. I left with copies in the red folder and a small breath in my chest that didn't hurt. I stopped by the insurance office next. Our broker is a man who wears his tie like he tolerates it. He looked at Bryn's email and said, "We don't change primary contact without owner authorization." I signed a letter restating exactly that. Adding that event coverage wasn't just a switch you flip. Any construction or events without my approval are not covered. I said, "And I'd like that in writing in case anyone wants to test the edges." He printed a letter with that sentence. I slid it into the folder. I asked him to confirm there had been no POA filed with them giving Landon authority to act. He confirmed none existed. Back at the store, I called the town office. The clerk on the variance desk knows my voice. "I'm looking at an application about my property," I said, "submitted by someone without authority. Please mark it as contested and require proof of authorization." She said, "I can do that now." I heard keys clicking like good rain. She gave me a date for the next planning meeting, and I wrote it in block letters on the calendar that hangs by the door to the office. The good pen did not blot. The day went on. A father and son came in for worms, and I asked the boy if he wanted to touch a leech. He did, bravely. He told me his mother says bravery is best when it helps something else live. I put the jar back with the tenderness you save for creatures you spend your life pretending you don't mind. A woman from town bought a bag of ice and told me she liked the way my coffee is coffee, not dessert. I nodded like a person who knows sugar is a fence too many people jump without their boots on. In the late afternoon, Landon came into the office, phone in hand. "Quick signature," he said. "POA. Temporary. It'll help move paperwork. Then we can all relax." He set the paper on the desk. The line for my name looked open and hungry. I didn't sit. I looked at the page and then at his face. I could see the boy under the man. The boy who broke his arm falling off the dock because he believed the board would hold him. "No," I said. He smiled like I was being silly. "Mum," he tried. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said again, softer, because softness makes a no harder to fight. "If you have a plan that respects what is mine, you can show it to me." If you need power of attorney to make your plan work, your plan shouldn't happen. He pulled his mouth into a shape that would make a weaker woman think she had failed at something. You're old, Mum, he said, without a microphone this time. You're weak. You can't keep doing this. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He had kicked a door that had held for years and thought it would fall. Weak. I looked at my hands. I thought about the winter I carried 5-gallon jugs to keep a generator running in a storm that turned the highway into a rumor. I thought about lifting a man twice my size onto the cot in cabin 2 when his sugar dropped and his wife couldn't lift him and the ambulance was 20 minutes out. I thought about learning the sound of a pump that wants to quit and making it try again. I thought about Bill dying in August when the bugs still wanted to drink. And how I went to the counter the next morning because grief is not a customer we serve here. I am not weak. I am worn smooth in the places that matter. I said nothing then. I ripped a piece of packing tape, folded it back on itself like a mind might, and used it to pick lint off the desk. I gave him back the paper without folding it. We're done talking about this like it's a favor. I said, I'll be at the town hall meeting. He left with a dramatic sigh that made no wind. That night I called my family doctor's office and asked for an appointment for a capacity assessment I did not need. Why? The receptionist asked kindly. Because my son needs to hear someone else say I can sign my name and understand what that means. I said. She gave me a time 2 days later. I put it in the calendar under the words "Watch me." I also called a lawyer in town who had helped me with Bill's estate. She said, "Come by tomorrow with your folder." I made tea I didn't drink and put the red folder on the table like a pet that knows when to behave. I added one more thing, a list of my staff with their ages and school schedules. Because I meant to protect them if this turned into a mess that would throw their checks late. I wrote the words, "Community Trust," on an index card and underlined them twice. Not because I knew what they meant yet, but because I like to put a stake in the ground where I want a conversation to happen. At dawn I did the useful work. Pumps first, coolers, coffee, garbage, receipts. I phoned the fuel supplier and booked the next delivery because I refused to let a boy's plan steal my right to plan for the only future that matters. The next truck that will nose up to pump 1 and sigh in relief when the handle clicks. I phoned the service tech and booked a preventative check on the overfill alarms because I am the kind of woman who still believes save is better than sorry. Then I went to the lawyer. She is younger than me and older than nonsense. I showed her the LOI, the deposit, the email, the variance application. She made those little sounds good lawyers make when sentences meet the wrong paper. "We'll revoke any draft powers of attorney you might have signed," she said. "We'll draft a new one naming someone you trust who isn't tempted, if you want that protection. We'll notify the town and the bank. And we'll talk about a trust that keeps your intent where your assets live." She printed things. I signed. She wrote a letter on her letterhead stating plainly that any instruments signed by Landon on my behalf were void because he lacks authority and capacity is intact. Watching a lawyer write the obvious in a tone that can be stapled to a foolish man's plan is a pleasure I reached the age to appreciate. When I drove back, Bryn's car was parked at an angle that suggested someone running inside to perform urgency. She was at the counter telling a couple from Thunder Bay about the coming upgrades. I stepped behind the till and peeled the tape off the new roll of receipts. I said, "The only upgrade coming today is a tighter lid on the coffee so I don't spill on my own shirt." The couple laughed and paid for gas and a bag of chips and a bundle of kind eyes. Bryn turned to me and said, "We're close. The developer loves the shoreline. The shoreline doesn't love developers." I said, "It loves ice out and kids with nets." She rolled her eyes in the tidy way of a woman who hasn't yet learned that rolling eyes toward the ceiling doesn't bring down permission. Later that afternoon, an email from the town landed, variance application flagged as unauthorized. Will be held. Parties may address council at next meeting. An email from the bank, permissions updated, dual authorization enabled, deposit placed into escrow pending ownership confirmation. An email from the insurer, per your letter. Coverage remains as declared. Any construction or events not authorized by owner are not covered. I printed them all and slid them into the red folder, which had begun to feel less like a folder and more like a spine. I closed early that night because the quiet had come in the kind of heavy I don't like to ask my staff to carry. I took the broom around the aisles the way Bill used to pretend sweeping was meditation when really he just liked looking busy while he thought. I turned the sign to closed and stood for a minute behind the counter with the cash drawer open and the bills lined like a choir. I have outlived a man. A hard winter. A pandemic. A pump that didn't want to admit it could last. I can outlive a son's sentence. But I don't have to just endure it. I can plan. I went back to the office and took the red folder apart and put it back together in an order that felt like a story I'd be proud to tell under harsh lights. Title on top. Then lawyer's letter. Then bank confirmation. Then insurer. Then town. Then environmental report. Then the list of wages I have paid when it would have been easier to close for a week and pretend closing for a week is how honorable people save money. I added an index card that read, public meeting. Witnesses. Longtime renters. Fuel supplier. Service tech. Paramedic neighbor. Teacher who uses our store for school fundraising candy drives. Sometimes the difference between drama and proof is the number of people in a room who can nod when you say you run a place the way a place deserves to be run. That night, in my kitchen rectangle that once held our second freezer before Bill admitted we didn't need a second freezer, I sat with a mug of hot water and wrote a sentence that felt like a hinge. He called me old and weak. So I will prove that strength is the kind that steadies a door, not slams it. I taped the sentence inside the front cover of the red folder because future me has a habit of forgiving too quickly when someone I love makes a mess. I don't want to be mean. I want to be sure. Tomorrow I'll make more phone calls, the doctor for the capacity letter, the accountant for a clean set of books the council can understand under fluorescent lights, my niece Nora to ask whether she'd be willing to serve as co-attorney in case I ever do trip and need someone decent's hand on my shoulder. I'll post a notice on the bulletin board where people buy minnows and pick up local news, Ellison's community update. Next Wednesday, 7 p.m., at the store. Coffee provided. No amplified sound. I'll put one at the library and one at the Legion. I'll invite the developer because a person should be allowed to hear the words no and community in the same paragraph. For now, I'm going to set the alarm, wash my face, and sleep the way women like me sleep when we have decided we won't let anyone call us weak and get away with it. If you're reading this, and if you've ever been told to step aside from your own life the way a chair gets pushed back to make room for a better table, hear me, we don't need fireworks. We need a folder, a plan, and a room full of people who recognize the sound of a pump doing its job. Some confrontations don't look like arguments. They look like errands. A doctor's waiting room with January lighting even in June. A bank desk where the stapler is heavier than pride. A lawyer's printer humming out pages that fence in a future you intend to survive. People think strength announces itself. Out here, strength checks the cooler temperature. Then prints a registered letter. That's what I did after my son called me old and weak without bothering with the poetry of it. I didn't shout. I sharpened a pencil until the wood kissed the graphite and wrote the list that would carry me through a week I didn't ask for but would not leave to chance. The first stop was the family clinic. My doctor has hands that look like they've held more farm shoulders than city wrists. The receptionist slid a clipboard toward me. I filled out forms I could do in my sleep and then sat in a chair that creaked the way mine at home creaks when I lean across the table to total a day's receipts. When he called my name, I stood without my knees telling on me. And that felt like a small pettiness I was enjoying on purpose. I did the memory questions. Spelled, world, backward like a party trick nobody wants to watch. Calculated sevens backward with the smugness of a woman who runs till counts down to the penny. Then he asked the real questions. Do you understand what a power of attorney is? Yes, I said. It's a tool I'll only hand to someone who doesn't want it. He smiled at that and wrote a note in a hand that made me trust him more. He examined me, asked me what day it was, and watched me look at the window the way a woman who lives by sun knows time better than anyone else in the room. Mara, he said at last, gentle but exact, I'll put in writing that you are fully capable of handling your affairs. This is for you. But I know who you're really giving it to. I nodded. My son, I said, and we allowed the sentence to be sad without needing to rescue it. I drove to the lawyer next because medicine can't file at the land registry. Her office smelled like paper and coffee and a little like disinfectant, three forces I believe in more than inspiration. I put my red folder on her desk. The one I'd labeled facts. Not feelings, and she went through it as if it were a patient. We revoked any draft powers of attorney I might have carelessly signed in better moods. We registered a fresh continuing power of attorney for property naming my niece Nora, accounting clerk at the town and allergic to nonsense, as first attorney. With my neighbor Rita as alternate. Not Landon? The lawyer asked. Neutral. When he loves me more than my land. I said, not cruel, just precise. We drafted a simple power of attorney for personal care too. For later. You're healthy, the lawyer said. I like giving my future the tools to treat me kindly. I said, and signed the lines where my name belongs. The letters striding across in the handwriting of a woman who learned to pen checks before machines pretended to be better at it. We prepared a letter on her letterhead to the Developers Council. Any letter of intent purporting to bind my property is void. The person who signed had no authority. Any deposit accepted has been moved to escrow. Any further contact regarding sale must come to me. In writing. With a legal name that matches the title you will find at the land registry. She slid it across for my signature. I didn't savor it. I stapled it to the workday. Then we spoke about the thing I'd written on an index card late at night when the house sounded too empty to make wise echoes. A community trust. You don't have to decide today. She said, we can pre-draft terms, conditions about cabin rates. Employment for longtime staff. Fuel access in winter storms. Maintenance of the general store as a community service. But for now. The first step is the hardest. Decide you'll put your intent somewhere paper can defend it when your voice is tired. I said, draft it. I'll sleep better with the bones on my desk. She drew boxes on a legal pad. Labeled them with words that stopped me shaking. Trustees. Use restrictions. Price caps. Succession. I left with copies, bank letters. Lawyer letters. The clean POA. A draft declaration for the trust, and drove back in a weather that only northwestern Ontario knows. Where the sky threatens rain just to keep you honest. At the store, Nora waved from behind the counter. She'd come in on her lunch to balance the petty cash because she likes doing math with a cash drawer the way some people like crosswords. You owe yourself a raise. I told her. Give me a Tuesday and a signature. She said, eyes sliding to the red folder. You mean give me Tuesday and 2 signatures? I said. We smiled, the tired smile of women who have learned to prefer paperwork to pity. I phoned the bank manager and read her the file numbers from the dual signature forms. All set, she said. Transfers above 500 now need 2 approvals. Your son's user access has been removed. The deposit is in escrow pending verification of authority. She promised a paper letter and I asked her to send it to the P.O. box. Not the store. Because I believe filing cabinets deserve exercise as much as bodies do. Then I called the insurance broker and asked him to issue a fresh certificate naming Ellison's General Store and Cabins, my legal name. Not anyone's mood, and stating that event coverage is excluded unless I approve. In writing. With full proof of the other party's insurance. You're enjoying this, he said, surprised. I'm enjoying watching boundaries learn to stand. I said. The next call was to the town clerk who handles planning applications. Variance app flagged, she said. We'll list it as unauthorized. There's a public meeting next Wednesday at the hall. The developer has slotted a presentation for a resort concept. You'll be given time to respond. I'll bring my folder, I said. Bring your patients, she answered. And a witness or 3. Witnesses I have, I wanted to say. They come for worms and ice and prescriptions for the kind of loneliness a store like mine fills without pretending to be medicine. I printed the notice and taped it to the glass door beside the ice chest. Town Hall, Wednesday, proposed rezoning discussion. Then I brewed a fresh pot of coffee. Because truth sits better with something warm in its hand. Late afternoon brings the men who work with their backs. And I fed them. Bryn glided in with her phone at her thigh and asked if I'd seen the article in a regional magazine about revitalizing lakefront commerce. I saw it, I said, truthfully, because someone had left it on the counter. It had a photograph of a wooden dock somewhere that knew nothing of our winters. With a caption promising that legacy businesses can be reborn. I put it under the stack of oil change reminders and let it be reborn as a surface for greasy hands. At 6. When the shadow of the canopy gets long and makes the gravel look like someone fixed it. Landon came back. He had a look city men wear when the thing they want is encountering the one kind of woman who won't give it to them. The mother who paid their tuition and taught them to check their oil. We've got momentum, he said. The developer wants a site walkthrough tomorrow. Nothing binding. Just due diligence. Don't make this adversarial. No walkthrough. I said. No meetings. No due diligence on land that isn't due to anyone. You don't get to make this adversarial against a fence that was here before you grew tall enough to look over it. He laughed in that brittle tone that tries to break the room. I'm protecting your retirement, he said. I'm protecting my life, I said. You can learn the difference as slowly as you like. I've got time. When he left, I climbed the 4 steps to the little rectangle I call home and sat at the table where Bill once glued the corner back when it splintered under a box of spark plugs. I made a list of sacrifices. Because the lawyer had told me to compile them in case the argument about guardianship took on teeth. I wrote, sold Bill's truck, double wall tanks and spill kits, heater replacement in cabin 2, winter wages during lockdown, sponsored the Pee Wee team when their jerseys came late, fuel for the volunteer fire chief on a night when the highway turned mean and the lake turned to glass under a siren. I wrote the receipts beside them. Dates, amounts, check numbers, not because I need anyone to praise me, but because paper makes a mother's memory into a ledger a judge will respect if asked. That night, I drafted 3 registered letters. One to the developer, cease all communications with any person purporting to represent Ellison's General Store and Cabins other than me. The registered owner. Any site visits, surveys, or promotional use of our name or images are unauthorized and will be treated as trespass and misrepresentation. 1 to the town. Please accept this as formal objection to any variance or rezoning application filed without my written authorization. 1 to Landon. Effective immediately. You are removed from all banking and vendor access. Any negotiations you initiated are void. Any funds received related to such negotiations have been placed in escrow. A capacity assessment confirming my competence is enclosed. Any further attempt to seek guardianship will be contested. I took them to the post office, paid the extra for tracking, and watched the clerk stamp each one with a deliberate grace that reminded me of church. The day before the public meeting, the pump mechanic arrived to perform the tank check I'd scheduled. He is a man who speaks in nouns more than adjectives, which is how I like everyone who touches a part of my life that can explode. He inspected the overfill alarms, tested the interstitial monitor, checked the dispenser shear valves, and signed his name on the service report with a flourish that suggested joy in being precise. "Solid," he said. "Your tanks are good. Whoever installed these wasn't in a hurry to regret it." "My husband," I said. He took his hat off for a half second. "Not long enough to make a show." "Good man," he said, still helping. The accountant dropped by next. "She's independent, likes receipts that aren't sticky, and brings her own stapler like a musician bringing his own fiddle." We printed trial balances, reconciled bank statements to the Z reports, tied the cash logs to deposit slips. "Clean," she said. "If I was on council, I'd like seeing this." I slid a copy into the red folder behind the lawyer's letter. The folder had begun to take on weight that made me stand straighter when I carried it. The way a baby on a hip can fix a mother's posture. The phone rang as I was counting the till with Lila, the teen who is saving for community college and stacks quarters like building blocks for a life. It was a reporter from the local paper. Respectful voice. Careful towing of the line between curiosity and intrusion. "We understand there's a rezoning conversation Wednesday," she said. "Would you like to comment?" "Only this," I said. "We sell gas, coffee, and quiet cabins. We have no plans to sell our name, our land, or our neighbor's peace." She asked if she could use that. "You can," I said, "if you add that our hours are 8 to 8 and we take cash." Debit. And manners. That evening, under a sky that was finally being honest about rain, Bryn posted a countdown to tomorrow's big step, site walk, with a picture of her boots on a dock that was not mine. I printed it and put it in the red folder. Then I walked the property line. Not because I didn't know it, but because I like being reminded where my yes stops and someone else's begins. The neighbor's dogs barked in the distance. A loon punched its sound into the air. The wind lifted my hair and set it down again the way a woman considers a decision and sets it aside to make dinner. Wednesday arrived big with weather and then decided to be calm by 6. I put on my good shirt and my "no foolishness" face and drove the 5 minutes to the town hall. Which is a hall because it has chairs and a clock and a heating system that is sometimes in a mood. The council table was set with microphones like you'd set a place for a hard conversation. People came. I didn't count them. I counted the stories they carried: truckers, teachers, lodge owners, my paramedic neighbor who once bought gas on a night so cold we refilled the coffee twice while he told me about a highway miracle. Landon and Bryn came in late, sat forward, whispered. The developer's team arrived in matching jackets that made them look like a chorus. The chair of the council, a man whose mustache has witnessed more budget meetings than any human should endure, opened the session. The developer presented slides of smiling families, revenue projections, the word activate used like a solution. Bryn nodded at intervals like punctuation. Landon looked at me the way a person looks at a locked door they used to walk through without asking. When the chair opened the floor, I stood and carried my red folder to the little podium as if it were a child who needed to see over a fence. I didn't start with a speech. I started with paper. Title deed. Name up where it should be. The doctor's letter, full capacity. The lawyer's letter, no authority granted to sign. The bank's letter, dual signatures. Escrow deposit. Sub-user rights removed. The insurance broker's letter, no coverage for construction or events without my written approval. The service report on the tanks, the environmental compliance certificate. The accountant's reconciliation. I laid them in a neat row because neatness is respect made visible. Then I spoke without raising my voice. My son told me I was old and weak. I said, letting the words sit long enough to stop being theatrical and start being ordinary. Here is what strength looks like where we live. The name on the title. The capacity letter from a doctor. The lawyer's notice. The bank's barricade. The insurer's refusal. The town clerk's objection. The tank's meeting standard. The book's balancing. The staff paid on time. The cabin's affordable to people who don't want to be burned by the word upgrade. I run a store. He ran his mouth. There was a something in the room then, not applause. Not outrage. The feeling you get when a snowplow appears at the top of a hill you thought you'd be stuck on until spring. I didn't push it. I turned to the gallery and asked for witnesses. Rita stood and said what needed to be said about winter deliveries and riffling through the till for loonies when a man's luck ran short and his wife had a prescription to fill. The paramedic talked about us opening in storms. The service tech held up the report and said, "These tanks are good for years." The accountant said, "The books are clean." A longtime renter from Winnipeg with rhubarb in her soul said, "Some places should be allowed to be exactly what they are." It wasn't theater. It was testimony. Landon tried his sentence then. "Mum, you deserve to rest." "I will," I said. "When the pumps are quiet and the staff paid and the cabins clean and the ledger reconciled and the dishes done." Bryn asked the council to consider the broader vision for the lakefront. The chair looked at my accountant and then at the file in front of him with the heading, Variance Application, and said, "The broader vision includes the authority of the person who owns the land." The council didn't vote that night. These things take a minute because the people who do them know permanence deserves time. But the chair said the application was incomplete and unauthorized and would be recommended for refusal if refiled without my written consent. He noted that the insurance and environmental documents would make any construction a practical impossibility without me. He thanked everyone and banged the little mallet nobody takes seriously until it looks like it intends to leave a dent in a table. I drove home slowly, a thing I allow myself a few times a year when dignity has earned enough interest to pay out in miles per hour. At the store, I locked the door and stood in the aisle where the motor oil meets the laundry detergent. I let my hand run along the boxes and thought about the way a shelf is a promise. If you put the right things on it in the right order, a stranger will find what they need without having to ask. That's what I'm building with this folder. These letters. This stance that refuses to collapse when somebody calls me weak. A shelf of proof. A place where the truth is reachable without performance. I'm not done. If the council refuses the variance, the developer will pout for a season and then go dress another shoreline in promises. If they don't refuse it, I'll appeal like a woman who didn't spend 40 years learning which forms matter. I'll file the trust, tighten the policies, make the two-signature rule such a part of the day that even I can't break it by accident when I'm tired and thinking about Bill. I'll change the alarm code, update the vendor files, and stand at the counter where I belong. Tomorrow I'll open at 4:45. Sweep before dawn. And run the logs before I run my mouth. And in a week. If the council puts ink to what they implied with eyes and mustaches and sighs. I'll make coffee stronger than usual and invite the regulars to stand around the island while I tape the decision to the corkboard with the good blue tape. I'll thank them for coming out and being witnesses. I'll thank the boy who touched a leech and his mother who taught him the right kind of brave. And I'll write one last letter, a calm, neat one, to my son. Explaining the conditions under which he might earn back a place that requires signatures and not speeches. That's for next time. For now, I'm going to put the red folder on the chair beside my bed and let it stand guard. Strength doesn't sleep. Exactly. But it rests. It knows morning will need it. Some resolutions don't come like summer rain. They arrive like a letter slid under a door, plain envelope. Typed name. The soft sound of something official choosing you. The Monday after the town hall. I unlocked the store at 4:45. Ran the pumps test. Wrote the cooler temperature, 2 degrees Celsius. Neat as mercy. Then put the kettle on the back burner of the old stove because caffeine and patience work better in a duet. By 8, I had sold 4 coffees. A breakfast sandwich to a man who apologized for dropping crumbs like he was confessing a sin. And 2 bundles of wood to a couple in sandals who would regret sandals by dark. I was halfway through the register tape when the first envelope came. Brown. Windowed. The town's crest printed tidy in the corner. It felt heavier than paper when I held it. Which is how you know something inside has agreed to be a fact. I didn't open it at the counter. I carried it to the office, the cinderblock room at the back that smells like paper and oil and the kind of quiet that doesn't have to prove itself, and slid it with the dull knife bill once used to open spark plug boxes. Inside, minutes from the meeting. The planning officer's note. And this sentence, application incomplete and unauthorized, recommended refusal. I set the page on the desk and pressed my palm against it until the ink felt warm. I am not a crier. But I breathed like my lungs had set down a crate. The tide in a small life isn't dramatic, it's a comma that lands where a dash used to be. By 11, 2 more letters had joined the first. The banks, confirming dual authorization in force. Sub-user rights removed. Escrow deposit held pending instruction from legal counsel, and the insurer's coverage remains as declared. Any construction or events without written owner consent are excluded. I photocopied both, slid the originals into the red folder under bank and insurance, and pinned copies to the corkboard in the office beside the recipe for Bill's favorite chili. It felt good to see the world agree with my binder. The developer's email came at noon. Short. Practiced. Written by counsel. We acknowledge your letter. We will withdraw our application. Kindly instruct your bank regarding the return of the deposit from escrow. I printed it. Wrote the word withdrawn in pencil at the top because some words deserve to live in graphite first. And called the bank. Release the funds back, I said. And send a paper letter saying you did. The manager promised she would. I pictured the clerk turning the handle on the safe. The neat signature on the ledger that proves the world moved exactly as much as it should and not a drop more. An hour later, the paper called. The reporter's voice was careful. Like stepping into a kitchen where bread is rising and you don't want to make the door slam. The council minutes are public. She said, would you like to add a comment? I kept it plain. We're a general store in 4 cabins. I said, we will remain so. We sell gas, bait, coffee, and quiet. Our shoreline is already employed. She laughed softly. Can I quote that? You can. I said, add that our hours are 8 to 8. And we respect the line where winter always wins but we try anyway. By late afternoon, Bryn pulled into the lot. Parked without flinging gravel. and came in with her phone in her bag and her eyes unclenched. She didn't head for the coffee machine. She walked straight to the counter and rested both hands on the metal edge like a woman getting her balance in a boat. "The developer's out," she said, voice smaller than slogans. "I know," I answered, gentle as the room allowed. "The town sent me the minutes." She looked around as if she expected the store to punish her. "We let people invent their own penance around here. It saves us from thinking we're judges." I thought I was helping. She said, "Lots of people think help is a cliff you can't see until someone pushes." I said, "Not unkind." She asked if she still had a place here. I told her she did, on paper and for pay. Not for control. "We'll write a service agreement." I said, "Hourly. Clear tasks. Social posts under my review. Cabin photos after we strip out the promises nobody should make about bugs. No access to the bank. No negotiations. No events. If you do well for 6 months. We'll talk about more." She swallowed and nodded. "I can do work," she said, "not just ideas. Work is the persuasion that lasts." I said, and passed her the rag we use for the counter. She wiped the coffee rings with the concentration of someone discovering muscles she had forgotten want a job. Landon came later. He didn't have his public face on. He wore the one I remember from broken bones and failed exams. A face that expects to be forgiven without learning much from the forgiveness. He leaned on the counter and looked at the floor because floors are honest and don't pretend to be an argument. "I got the council minutes," he said, "and the developer's email." I waited. "When you raise a son, you learn to let silence do part of the teaching." "I made a mess," he said, aiming for confession and landing in inventory. "You tried to sell a thing you didn't own." I said, not raising my voice, because facts deserve neutral ground. He nodded and looked toward the cooler. "I thought you'd be relieved." He tried. "From what?" I asked. He didn't have a cheerful line handy. He had the next right one. "From carrying everything," he said. "You call it carrying." I said, "I call it living." He didn't argue. I opened the red folder and slid a paper across the counter. A repayment plan for the deposit expense he had attempted to reroute with operating efficiencies, and a second for minor purchases that had drifted out of bounds, the magazine ad. The website template. The fuel he comped to a friend, for goodwill. The totals weren't punitive. They were math. He read, flinched without drama, and nodded. "I'll pay," he said, "every month." I said, "On the 1st. To the account you can't touch otherwise." Then I slid a second document across, the 2-signature resolution for store operations. With a fresh page that listed who those signatures could be. Mine. Nora as co-attorney on property matters when needed. Rita when it was payroll week and my hand was already writing too many names. "If you want back in," I said, "you can earn it. 12 months. No attempts to negotiate without me in the room. No press. You take the shifts that are long and the jobs that aren't fit for Instagram. Propane fills in sleet. Cleaning the fish sink after a week of men who forgot to rinse. Morning cash count when the tape tears and your patience tears with it. You complete a small business management certificate at Confederation College night class. Not optional. You learn HST filings with me standing there. And you file 3 clean returns. You respect that this place is older than your ambition. Then we talk." He looked at the paper and let the dignity in it rest on him. "Okay," he said, which is the most beautiful word a mother hears after a season of no. That evening I closed early to host what I had promised on the bulletin board, a community update. It wasn't the town hall. It was the pack room. Washed and swept. 6 chairs. And a folding table with coffee. The paramedic came between calls. Rita from next door brought cheese curds like a benediction. The counselor with the honest mustache stopped by to sit in the corner and be a civilian. I put the red folder in the middle of the table like a guest with excellent manners and gave the update I wanted to give the minute I realized this story would need witnesses. The rezoning application is recommended for refusal. The developer has withdrawn. The escrow deposit is being returned. Insurance stays as is, no events. Banking is locked. Operations continue like they've always meant to. We're drafting a community trust that will keep the cabins affordable and the pumps working in winter storms. With trustees named so that when I am actually old and weak, someone decent will hold the clipboard. People nodded. They ate shortbread. The electric kettle clicked. It felt like a tiny church in a religion that forgives paperwork its sins. After the update, I taped 3 things to the corkboard where the lotto slips and lost dog notices compete for eyes. The first, the council minutes line that mattered. The second, our new store and cabin policy, hand-lettered. Nothing fancy. Effective immediately. 2 signatures required for transfers greater than $500 and for supplier contracts. No events. No rezoning. No site walks without owner consent. Cabins remain family affordable. Peak season rates capped per posted schedule. Winter fuel access prioritized for emergency services. We sell gas, coffee, bait, and quiet. The third, a little plain announcement with more heart than design. Ellison Community Trust. Draft in office. Comment welcome. Come in. Read it. Write your name if you want to see this place stay what it is when the next person with shiny shoes shows up with a deck and half a map. Sleep doesn't sound different on a night like that. The fridge still hums like it wants applause. The clock still clicks like an insect that lost its way and decided to become time. But I slept. Not because the story was over. Because the threat had been catalogued and filed and met with spines of my own choosing. Strength is not a mood. It is a policy. In the days that followed, consequences found their chairs like polite guests. The developer withdrew the variance formally, the town stamped it and filed it with the kind of zeal that reassures a citizen. I instructed the bank to release the escrow deposit back to them. The manager mailed me a paper confirmation and then, because she is my neighbor too, bought gas and a coffee the next morning and said, "Good work," like the phrase can be applied to a ledger. Our insurer sent an updated declarations page with a line I read twice for pleasure. Named insured, Ellison's General Store and Cabins, M. Ellison. The accountant dropped off the compiled financials and suggested a clean chart of accounts for the trust when I was ready. "Mind if I steal your phrasing?" she asked. Pointing to a line on my policy draft, "We sell gas, bait, coffee, and quiet." "Steal it," I said. "Put it on a mug. We'll stock it." Bryn started her first paid week under the service agreement. I had written it myself with the lawyer's edits and the kind of clarity my younger self would have thought unromantic. Deliverables. Approval process. Confidentiality. Termination clause. She photographed the cabins at dawn. No filters. Just light behaving. She drafted a post about respecting the lake's pace, and let me cut 3 adjectives. She answered phone calls about availability and learned the sentence that changes the day from doable to good. "We're full this weekend. But cabin 2 frees up Sunday and I can hold it for you until noon." She wiped the counter when no one was watching. She swept the flies from the window ledge without horror. I watched her find the part of herself that likes to be useful. Not just seen. It made me less tired to share the room with that. Landon started his first repayment with an e-transfer to the escrow's designated receiving account. The note said, "For Mum, installment 1. I didn't reply with a heart, I replied with a receipt attached. Initialed, Because men learn from receipts what they miss in metaphors. He took 2 opening shifts that week without grumbling, stocked oil filters with the labels forward, filled the propane cage, cleaned the fish sink in back with a face that finally understood the grace of bleach. He sat with me while I filed the HST and PST returns and didn't make a joke about government theft. Which is how I knew humility had found him for an hour. He called the college about the small business course and printed the syllabus. He has 12 months to turn that into trust. I am busy, I will still notice. The paper ran a small story. Not a profile, thank God. And I mean that. But a photo of the old sign with the lake behind it and a caption that made me feel known without being performed. Council recommends refusal of unauthorized application. Ellison's to remain as is. Locals came in and slapped the counter like we'd won a hockey game. A tourist from Ohio asked if this is how Canada works and I told him sometimes. He bought 2 coffees and apologized for liking our money too much. Rita from next door brought over leftovers and called them supper. I put them on a plate and refused to pretend otherwise. The paramedic swung by late one night and filled his tank. Then bought a donut he didn't need just to say, keep going. A week later, the trust's draft sat on my desk like something that knew my name. The lawyer had woven my conditions into clauses with patient threads. Cabin rate caps keyed to a public schedule, a commitment to operate the pumps year-round. With emergency priorities written in like a promise we'd post when nasty weather cheered itself up by making the highway mean. Employment preference for our current staff. A table of decisions that require all trustees to sign and a very short table of decisions one person can make when the power goes out and the town needs gas. Trustees. Me. For now, Nora. Because she keeps numbers in a place where shame can't reach, and when she agreed, Rita. Because she knows how to say no like a woman handing you soup, warm, firm, nourishing. When I signed the draft to indicate intent, I felt older, yes, and weaker in the ways that time insists on. But I also felt like a wall you can lean a ladder against and trust it to behave. Here's the part you asked for, the comment that isn't paperwork. My son called me old and weak. He meant it like a kindness and like leverage. I answered with signatures instead of speeches. And the world chose to believe signatures because signatures make their own weather. If there's something you take from this, let it be this. A mother's will isn't loud. It does not always show up as a miracle you can quote. It shows up as a bank letter. A policy posted. A town minute recorded. A boy sweeping in the morning because he has learned debt can be paid with hours as well as dollars. It shows up as a woman refusing to be forced off her own land by shame marketed as modernization. It shows up as a general store with a mop and a hand that knows how to use it. I don't think of what I did as revenge. Revenge burns hot and leaves you cold. What I wanted, and got, was order. The kind that lets you sleep because the freezer is at the right temperature and the alarm works and the ledger's numbers add the way daylight adds up if you don't waste it. My son is still my son. I love him with the same stubborn affection I bring to the pump when it groans in February. If he learns to love the place for what it is instead of what a slide deck can sell. He can have more than a condo to visit me in. He can have mornings where the first customer calls him, Bud, and means it. And nights when the last truck pulls off the lot and the canopy lights down and the highway hum says you kept your corner of the world doing its job. If he doesn't, the cabins will still be there for children who need one good week. And the store will still be open for somebody whose need looks like a can of beans and a kind word. We posted one more sign. Just inside the door, where the postcards and minnows and lottery pens make their case. It's not fancy. It's black marker on white cardstock. Taped with blue painter's tape because blue denies drama. We're not for sale. We're for service. Gas, bait, coffee, quiet. Hours, 8 to 8. Thank you for keeping us alive the ordinary way. People take photos of it. Some roll their eyes, then smile, then buy a coffee. That's all the applause this kind of life can stand without tipping over into performance. If this story felt like a hand on your shoulder, if it helped you imagine what your own red folder could hold, tell me. Like this if it steadied something in you. Subscribe if you want more quiet, stubborn stories about mothers who keep places honest with receipts and rules. And common. Have you ever been called too old, too weak, or in the way, and answered with policies instead of shouting? What did you put in your folder? Who signed? What changed? If it rang true, share it with a friend who thinks progress means replacing what works. There will be another story when the lake thaws and the pumps test green. I'll be here at 4:45. Same as ever. Pen ready. Lights on.